And now, as our main speaker to present the report, I want to introduce very briefly Helmut Anheier. I'm sure he doesn't really need to be introduced to this audience in his home institute, but Helmut is Dean of the Hertie School, which is the most important thing you need to know about him. The fact that he was at Yale, at UCLA, and indeed taught at the LSE, a bit too early for my son, I regret to say, Helmut. But he's also the principal author and I think inspiration of this report. And I think we'll set out just what you're trying to put your finger on here. I mean, in the great broad sweep of things, it's clear that with globalization, we have, and the end really of the old Cold War, where the US dominated the debate, we don't have the institutes of governance to match the challenges we face. So how have you analyzed that, and what are you proposing to do about it? Helmut, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Quinton. Thank you very much, Dr. Feldman. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the launch of the 2013 governance report. And in a way, Quinton, you're absolutely right. Nobody in his right mind would ever write such a report. Taking on an assessment of how well is the world governed is setting oneself up for failure at some level, but I think if nobody does it, why shouldn't we do it and give it a try? So here is the 2013 governance report and what we have come up with. I know in this audience there are probably those who wonder what is governance all about in the first place. We at the Hertie School like to think of governance as how we manage to deal with public problems, whether it's healthcare, education, the environment, many problems like that are not singular problems, but they're public problems in the sense that they affect many of us at the same time. We are also interested in identifying how well are we actually managing these problems. Now, you can think of governance as a process where we identify a problem, we bring it to some form in which we can make a decision about it, how we respond, how we implement it, how we manage it, and how we regulate it. And in the end, we ask ourselves, well, are we better off, right, in managing the environment, in managing fiscal policy, and the like. So this is what governance is. It's a very complex process, as you can imagine, and we set ourselves here at the Hertie School the goal to try to understand how the world and how those legitimately charged to do so are performing, right? So what is puzzling about is why so few of today's global issues are being settled, and this is how we began to think about it. Of course, governance, in the best of times, is a difficult art, it's a difficult matter. Just think about how we in this country have been dealing with daycare centers for children. Right? We simply have not been able to get the right handle on it. You can add many other instances where we try to do something and we not quite succeed. We're not failing, but we're not succeeding. Sometimes we succeed and we do get a solution. And we're very interested in identifying what are the solutions out there in helping us address governance issues. Now, in the best of times, governance is difficult. Now, we live in a time that is not an easy time. The 21st century has entered a profound period of insecurity. We all know that. We have now 12 years of this century behind us, and most of these years have been years of uncertainty, and they have been unsettled times indeed. Now, why that is the case, this is the starting point for the governance report. We say what is different today, and we're not the first to say it, but we begin there saying we live in an interdependent world, where those who think they can set the terms of trade, they think they can come up with a solution by their own, may find it no longer possible to the extent it was in the past. Interdependence. So what is a problem in terms of pollution cannot be addressed by one single actor alone. The same with a currency crisis, and I could add many more of those issues that link those charged with governance to others who are all equally charged with making governance decisions. There is, second, the idea, the profound insight, in fact, that governance in today's world is no longer a matter of sovereign states and for sovereign states alone. There are other actors that come into play, namely corporations, the large corporations, but also civil society. The third element that makes today's world different is that there is a profound and significant mismatch between responsibility and capacity to act. Just think about the United Nations, the responsibility the United Nations has, and its de facto capacity to act. But you can say the same about the tax authorities in some EU member states. Right? In the end, we come to two key insights. One is that we identify a sovereignty paradox. There's something not quite right about how we think about sovereignty today. The second key insight, before we then come to solution, is that we keep ignoring very important trade-offs. Now, let me unpack these a bit in the few minutes I have and try to identify why are we in fact ready to handle a future challenge. If another financial crisis were to come, and for all we know, there will be one at some point, we just don't know when, are we going to be ready? If a major environmental disaster or crisis hits this part of the world or any other, are we in fact ready to face that challenge? Now, Inge Kaul, in her chapter, identified a series of requirements that I won't go into detail at all, and I'll leave it to you to hopefully have time to read the report. She identifies a number of governance requirements, those requirements that would have to be in place, not necessarily with the nation state, but also with multinational institutions, to stave off the next crisis. Right? Are we correcting for fairness deficits, for example, in global justice? Are we having better externality management? Think about how one financial crisis has a contagious effect and infects other countries. Right? So are we actively addressing the interdependence in the policies that we are trying to push forward? So is the energy policy that the US government at the moment is pushing forward, in fact, addressing the interdependence of energy supply and how that relates to pollution in the world, or not? Right? So Inge Kaul developed these benchmarks that we later on try to link to our indicator system. So we will, over time, be able to track how ready governments actually are, or those we charge with responsibility to be ready in addressing the next challenge. Now, there are serious trade-offs in the way we deal with financial policy, but in many, many other policy fields as well. Mark Halleberg and his colleagues, in a chapter in the book, take the fiscal and financial crisis of 2008 onward, almost to the present, and in that they identify serious trade-offs. One is between liquidity and moral hazard. If you help now, is this simply, if you help now by pouring cash into a country, helping a country financially, is that simply creating the next crisis in the future? And that is the moral hazard problem. Are you playing as a politician or as somebody in charge of an institution in that field of financial policy? Is it domestic politics that's important to us, or are you also willing to stand up for international commitments? So sorting out these trade-offs is a critical part of what we address in the governance report. Now, Inge Kaul comes in her chapter to an insight that leads us to revisit the very concept of sovereignty. And she calls it responsible sovereignty or smart sovereignty. Right? It is a sovereignty that acts out of strength and not out of weakness, out of recognizing interdependence and not out of undue demonstration of national power. It is a new way of looking at sovereignty, and I think if thought through to the end, it will lead us to a new version of the Westphalian world, which in many ways has become part of the problem that we're addressing. Mark Halleberg, in his chapter, saying that you need to address these trade-offs, and you can address these trade-offs, but you have to be very careful and thoughtful in balancing technocratic and the political approaches. And I think in the debate, he will flesh that out in more detail. Now, where do new ideas for governance come from, you might ask? Right? If it's in the field of technology or in the economy, we say, oh yes, firms innovate. Right? We have Apple, we have Google. Things are developing. The world is becoming an easier place to live in. But what about governance? Are we actually having a surge in governance innovation? Are we investing in governance innovation? Are they happening? Are they being picked up? Is there a market for bright ideas on how to reform government? Well, so part of the report is to search for governance innovation. And we did spend quite a lot of time looking at hundreds of proposals that have been made in many, many different parts of the world, many different countries, in many different fields, where an official, but very often a representative of a civil society institution, had a bright idea of how we can improve governance, the discharge of public obligation. And we found, first of all, there is no bazooka out there, that sometimes it is no grand vision of how we can actually have a new framework for governance. There is nothing like what social democracy was in this part of the world in the 1970s, or what the neoliberal agenda was in the United States in the 1990s. There's no real equivalent of that. But at the same time, right, knowing that there is no grand vision, we do see a cacophony of many, many, many smaller attempts to improve governance. So it's an incremental move that is observed in the way we try to perfect existing governance systems. Very often, the impetus for reform does not come from within government itself or from in the public administration. Very often, the ones we looked at, not exclusively, but very often, you had outsiders come in and make a suggestion. These outsiders were very frequently civil society institutions. But the key is that then government or the public sector picks up these signals and forms a partnership of sort with either civil society, with corporations, in addressing that problem. In the report, we highlight only 10 or 12 of those governance innovations that we think are significant. We're not necessarily saying they're always good. They might as well turn into something questionable over time. We never know. But they are certainly novel, and they seem to hold promise. And that promise is that we want to follow over time in coming reports. So if we say that the ethical policy of the Norwegian pension fund is really breaking new grounds, is it actually happening in 2 or 3 years still? Or what is the promise held by the internet-driven activities like the Open Government or My Society? Is it really making government more participatory at a local level? Do we have better information flows between public administration and citizens if we have these internet-based platforms? So we will track many of these, and the one that I think is among the most fascinating innovations that have been happening in recent years are the social impact bonds that are currently being tested in various countries, where you introduce social investment markets to get a more efficient and effective allocation of risks and rewards in addressing public problems. In this case, in Peterborough in the UK, it was the high recidivism rate, or in the German case, it's school dropouts. But you can address public problems like that through smart social investment markets. Something to watch, and we will watch it. But how can we then measure progress and performance? Right? This is an ongoing attention that the report will throw or address on government systems. Inge Kaul came up with these 6 requirements, right? Governance readiness. Can we find indicators that speak to these dimensions of readiness? That was a guiding vision behind the development of that indicator system, which will go online today, where you can see the data. They would be then for public use. We see a bridge between readiness and performance and an ultimately outcome. Right? If you say you are ready to meet challenges, does it then make a difference in the end? Right? And the third component that we track in the indicator system, which is the focus of next year's report, as far as that part is concerned, is innovation. Can we have an indicator or a series of indicators that tracks how innovative governments are? Right? We have statistics on patents. Why don't we have statistics on governance innovativeness or of bright ideas of how to solve public problems? Now, Piero Stanek and Mark Kaiser, two colleagues here at the Hertie School, have been responsible for that part, and Mark is going to join the debate later on. We have moved away from the idea that governance is necessarily a matter of government, of states. Right? And today's governance has to do as much with what cities think, as what regions have in mind, and what the big corporations do. Whether they're called Amazon or Google, what they think in terms of governance matters. And we will, over time, incorporate their performance and their readiness into our indicator systems, as we will the behavior of the very large not-for-profit organizations and NGOs. So we think of governance as a multi-actor system, right, involving government, business, and civil society. And with that approach, we can answer a number of questions, and I simply leave those with you because they are answered in the report. Did the Kyoto Protocol actually contribute to better externality management? Right? In clearer English, did it make a difference for the environment? Right? Does greater bureaucratic effectiveness actually mean better governance of the country as a whole? And what is the impact of having a strong civil society on government? And on the last one, we actually do find that a strong and vibrant civil society contributes significantly to having an overall better governance of the country, certainly a more transparent one. So with this overview, let me just come to some of the conclusion or the recommendations. We as a policy school, of course, have our footing in academia, but we want to be relevant and we want to make suggestions. We want to say, based on the work we have done for the Governance Report 2013, we come to the following recommendations, and we address it to the policy community, but we also address it to us as academics. And one major recommendation that Inge Kahl will address in more detail when we have the debate is that we do need to modernize sovereignty, the very notion of sovereignty. One way of doing that is to push for a high-level commission on responsible sovereignty, best lodged, we think, with the United Nations. And we will, in fact, take this report and take this debate to the UN in early March, where we have, I think, a good opening to get some sort of a hearing. That's, I think, one important opportunity for us to keep thinking about what sovereignty means, and we should no longer take it as a fixed and granted entity. For us academics, it means that we have to come up with positive sum solutions. I think the social impact bonds and many of the other innovations, they are a positive sum proposal in the sense that in the end, everybody is better off. Right? The investors are better off. Those who administer the social problem are better off. Government is better off because they can say, oh, we did something. Right? And even those who are the problem are better off because we have solved at least part of it for them. So thinking about positive sum solution is as much something that we academics should do as it is that we have to ask policymakers to engage in as well. Right? So with these kind of summary remarks, let me leave it and point your attention to the website where the report is available in more detail, in particular when it comes to the indicators. Thank you very much.